The Remarried Empress. Empress Navier sits in the imperial court, facing her husband, Emperor Sovieshu, as he prepares to divorce her. With a composed expression, she accepts the divorce without resistance, much to the shock of the nobles present. The court minister, her family, and her loyal allies, including Marquis Farang and Countess Eliza, had all expected her to fight the decision. A lengthy divorce trial would have tarnished Sovieshu's reputation and possibly stopped the separation. However, Navier chooses not to resist, knowing that such a battle could damage her as well. Just as everyone is processing her calm acceptance, she delivers an even greater shock. She requests permission to remarry. The entire court falls into stunned silence. Even Sovieshu, who had seemed half relieved about the divorce, is caught completely off guard. His eyes widen in disbelief as Navier points to a mysterious veiled man who immediately bursts into amused laughter and steps forward. When he removes his veil, Sovieshu jumps to his feet in outrage, but Navier stands firm. This is the man she will marry. As Navier watches Sovieshu's reaction, she reflects on their history together. Born into the prestigious Trobi family, Navier was raised from childhood to be a perfect empress. In noble society, marriages were rarely about love. They were about politics and duty. Romance, if it existed, was something reserved for lovers outside of marriage. Navier's marriage to Sovieshu had been arranged, but they had gotten along well, more like close friends and trusted colleagues rather than lovers. They rarely fought, and they shared a vision for the empire's future. For 3 years after Sovieshu took the throne, their relationship remained stable. She had done everything expected of an empress. But that all changed when he brought her into the palace. One evening, Navier returns to her chambers after a long day of imperial duties. She notices that her ladies-in-waiting look unusually tense, their faces pale with anxiety. When she asks them what happened, they reveal an unsettling story. While on a hunting trip, Sovieshu found an injured woman caught in a trap. Instead of leaving her behind or sending her away, he brought her back to the palace. But what disturbed the ladies-in-waiting the most was what happened next. The emperor ordered them to bathe and dress the woman. This was unheard of. Navier's attendants were all noble women, and their sole duty was to serve the empress. For Sovieshu to personally order them to care for another woman was an open insult to Navier's status. Still, Navier listens calmly. The woman, they say, was beautiful, so stunning in fact that even covered in dirt, her beauty was striking. After being bathed and dressed, she was said to rival Duchess Twania, the most famously beautiful woman in the empire. This woman, now residing in the palace, was rumored to be a runaway slave. Some believed she had escaped from Viscount Rotiscu's estate as his lands bordered the imperial hunting grounds. The ladies-in-waiting are disgusted by the idea that the emperor pities a lowly runaway, but more than that, they fear something worse. Sovieshu seems interested in her. Navier is not a naive woman. In noble society, it is common for men to take lovers. Her own mother had once warned her, "Emperors always have concubines. Do not waste your anger on it. As long as you remain young, beautiful, and healthy, that is all that matters." Still, Navier cannot help but feel a strange, lonely ache in her heart. The next day, rumors about the hunting ground girl spread even faster, filling the palace with whispers. Her ladies-in-waiting encourage Navier to confront Sovieshu, but she decides to wait. She will bring it up casually during their scheduled dinner the following evening. When the time comes, Navier dresses elegantly, not because she expects to win Sovieshu's favor, but because her attendants insist. At the dining table, she waits patiently for him to mention the girl himself, but he never does. Eventually, she asks directly, pretending she heard it from the palace gossip. "I heard you found a runaway slave at the hunting grounds. Is that true?" Sovieshu immediately freezes, his knife clattering against his plate. His expression darkens, and his mood shifts from neutral to cold. Instead of answering directly, he asks who told her, clearly irritated. Navier presses again. "Is it true?" Sovieshu's voice is clipped and defensive. He avoids calling the woman a slave and instead describes her as a woman who was badly hurt, an oddly gentle way to speak about someone of such low status. Growing more suspicious, Navier asks where the woman is now. Sovieshu's patience snaps. We only have 2 meals together per week. Shouldn't we talk about something else? The meaning behind his words is clear. Do not ask about her. Do not interfere. For the first time, Navier realizes just how deep Sovieshu's interest in this woman might be. She had expected him to take a concubine someday. She had expected to ignore it just as her mother advised. But this time, something feels different. This is not just about a concubine. This is about her place as empress. And she is about to lose it. In the dimly lit dining room of the imperial palace, tension hung heavy in the air. The empress maintained her usual tone and gentle smile as she addressed Sovieshu, her husband. Other things to talk about? Your Majesty, I did not suggest anything unusual. As the owner of the imperial palace, I'm simply asking if you brought in an injured woman. It's never happened before. Sovieshu's unease was palpable. He avoided her gaze, his brow furrowing with suspicion. Are you asking because you're only curious? I wouldn't be asking if I wasn't curious, she replied, her heart racing at the implications of his discomfort. Sovieshu sighed, finally relenting. She was accidentally caught in one of my traps, and I brought her here so she could be treated. She's not too injured, so I've had her put in a room with a maid to look after her. I see, the Empress responded, a knot forming in her stomach. Don't worry. I won't call your ladies-in-waiting again. As he resumed cutting his steak, the sound of the knife echoed in the silence, amplifying the uncharacteristic lack of conversation. The atmosphere grew increasingly uncomfortable, leaving the Empress to ponder the implications of Sovieshu's words. After dinner, she returned to the West Palace, where a group of her ladies-in-waiting gathered anxiously in her room. What did His Majesty say? One of them asked, her eyes wide with anticipation. He didn't say much, the Empress replied, trying to mask her unease. Countess Eliza raised her eyebrows, clearly skeptical of the Empress's lukewarm response. Then you would not be so sullen. It's all right. Talk to us, Your Majesty. That way we can be prepared, Laura chimed in, eager for details. The Empress took a deep breath. He said the woman was accidentally caught in one of his traps. There was no mention of her being a runaway slave or anything like that. As she spoke, it struck her that she hadn't even thought to ask for the woman's name. He said he was taking care of her, and he seemed unhappy to keep talking about it. Laura, ever outspoken, stamped her foot in frustration. Your Majesty, do you know that's exactly what my father was doing at the beginning of his affair? Gasps of surprise followed, and Countess Eliza shot Laura a warning glance, but Laura pressed on, undeterred. Those are exactly the early signs of an affair. Why wouldn't he want to talk about it? The other ladies murmured in agreement, their expressions betraying a mix of concern and intrigue. Countess Eliza took charge, ushering the ladies out as the Empress sat in a haze of melancholy. She settled in front of the dressing table while Eliza gently combed her hair. The Emperor is a man who likes to hunt. Finding a beautiful woman caught in his trap must seem like a miracle to him, Eliza said softly, trying to comfort her. Countess, the Empress replied, her voice steady yet filled with sorrow. Before, my mother told me that even if the Emperor takes another woman as his lover, I should not let myself be hurt. There are so many cases like that, and I shouldn't expect it to be any different. Countess Eliza frowned, struggling to comprehend the weight of the Empress's words. Her own marriage had been one of love, and she found it difficult to reconcile that with the Empress's reality. I didn't say this in front of the other ladies, but I am a little prepared, even if the Emperor welcomes a slave woman as his concubine. Your Majesty. But when he doesn't speak to me, I feel a little down, the Empress admitted, her voice wavering. Eliza paused, placing the comb down to embrace the Empress. After a moment, she withdrew to meet the Empress's gaze. Even though yours is a political marriage, you've been together since you were children. It's no surprise that you're upset. I would feel the same if my child were to bring someone else in as their foster parent. The Empress nodded, the sadness in her heart lingering. Then would the Emperor feel that way if I had another man next to me? Countess Eliza hesitated, the silence hanging heavily between them. Finally, she replied, To be honest, I don't know, Your Majesty. The more powerful your love is, the harder it is to look around. This realization struck the Empress hard, leaving her to grapple with the solitude of her situation. She forced a smile, attempting to mask her sorrow. I see. I'm sure I'll feel better soon. She and I won't have to meet each other? Yes. Even if the slave becomes a concubine, she still cannot enter into high society. The notion of status offered the Empress some comfort, and she gathered her resolve. Yet as she retreated to her garden, a secret haven she had designed for solace, she couldn't escape the whispers that filtered through the flowering walls. The Emperor goes to see the slave day after day? I heard he even brings her food himself. He's acting so calm too, the audacity. He even called a court doctor to treat her leg. The voices swirled around her, each word digging deeper into her heart. The rumors surrounding the Emperor's growing interest in the woman intensified, leaving her feeling cornered. She closed her book, her thoughts racing. Wasn't it fortunate that she and the slave woman never crossed paths? When the Empress dined with Sovieshu again, she consciously chose not to mention the woman, pretending that nothing had changed. Instead, she steered the conversation toward New Year's preparations, hoping to navigate the evening without acknowledging the growing rift between them. But fate had a way of intervening, and just as she thought she could maintain her composure, the threads of coincidence tightened around her, hinting that she would soon have to confront the reality of her situation. The day had arrived for the Empress to gather with officials in the conference room to discuss the preparations for the upcoming new year. After hours of deliberation, her throat felt parched, and she sought solace in a glass of warm water. To clear her mind, she decided to take a stroll in the Central Palace garden, accompanied by Artina, the deputy commander of the Knights, and her ladies-in-waiting. As they walked, she engaged in conversation with Artina about suitable recommendations for the ceremony. In the midst of their discussion, she caught a whisper carried by the breeze. Is that her? Curious, the Empress turned to see a woman in a wheelchair, flanked by two maids. When their eyes met, the woman struggled to rise from her chair. The maids instinctively reached to assist her, but hesitated upon meeting the Empress's gaze. With a firm grip on the wheelchair, the woman stood and bowed in greeting. The Empress's heart raced. She recognized the potential of this encounter. Could this be the slave Sovieshu had brought to the palace? But she quickly dismissed the idea. This was the Central Palace, a place where a mistress would not dare to tread. Your Majesty, the woman said, her voice a soft tremor. The Empress nodded in acknowledgement, her curiosity piqued, but hesitant to engage further. Just as she turned to leave, she heard the unexpected call of, "Hey," from behind her. Hey? The Empress was taken aback. No one had addressed her so casually since her ascension to the throne. Flustered, she glanced back to see the woman wheeling herself toward her. Alarmed, the maids cried out, "Rashta, don't!" But the woman ignored them. I'm Rashta, the woman introduced herself, her eyes bright with an earnest smile. The Empress was momentarily speechless. Yes, Rashta. Rashta's smile widened at the sound of her name. The Empress felt a surge of curiosity. Why was this woman approaching her so openly? Surely she knew who the Empress was, yet here she was, speaking to her as if they were equals. As the formal audience time concluded, the Empress's mind swam with thoughts, and she attempted to brush off the encounter. Yet Rashta reached out and grabbed the hem of her dress, startling the Empress and her ladies-in-waiting. How rude, one of them exclaimed. Do you not recognize this noble? Rashta flinched, her demeanor shifting from bold to apologetic. I'm sorry, I should have called out to you, but I don't know your name. The ladies-in-waiting exchanged incredulous glances. This is Her Majesty the Empress. Be careful with your actions. Laura, the most outspoken of the group, chastised her fiercely. Rashta's eyes widened in shock. What? I know the Empress. Confusion washed over the Empress. You know me? Rashta appeared taken aback by the question. You don't know me? I'm not sure. Oh. Rashta's expression faltered as she looked to her maids for guidance. What do I do? The Empress, sensing the absurdity of the situation, felt her patience thinning. She was about to dismiss Rashta when the woman spoke again. I am living in the Eastern Palace by the kindness of His Majesty the Emperor. The kindness of Sovieshu, the pieces began to fit together. The wounded legs, the whispers, and now this encounter. The slave? The realization dawned upon her. But just as quickly, Rashta's expression changed. Your Majesty, forgive me for my rudeness. Miss Rashta is not a slave, one of her maids interjected. Not a slave? The Empress's heart raced at the contradiction. Her ladies-in-waiting had spoken of Rashta as a runaway slave. Confusion mingled with intrigue as she took in Rashta's beauty. She was not like the glamorous nobles. Her beauty was soft, ethereal, with an innocence that tugged at the Empress's heart. Rashta, with her light silver hair and large dark eyes, stirred a protective instinct within her. But how could her ladies-in-waiting have bathed her and not recognized her? The Empress glanced around, realizing that a few of her attendants were absent, the very ones who had prepared Rashta. Yes, now I know who you are, the Empress finally said, watching as Rashta beamed with relief. Thank goodness. Actually, I've been wondering when we'd meet each other. Meet? The Empress frowned, unsure why this encounter felt so strange. I asked the Emperor, but he kept telling me that I didn't have to bother. But I thought we should still do so. The Empress's head spun with confusion. What should I call you, Your Majesty? Just call me, Your Majesty, she replied, feeling oddly unguarded. Huh? That's it. Rashta seemed to tire from their conversation, grunting as she attempted to maneuver her wheelchair. Sensing the Empress's growing discomfort, her ladies-in-waiting pulled Rashta back. Stay away, Laura commanded, her voice laced with anger. Just who are you to act so friendly towards her? Filthy, another added. At that moment, Sovieshu appeared, his presence cutting through the tension like ice. What do you mean, filthy? He demanded, his voice icy as he looked at Laura and the others. The atmosphere shifted as everyone turned to face the Emperor, uncertainty swirling in the air. The Empress, caught between conflicting emotions, realized that the dynamics of her world were shifting in ways she had not anticipated. The Emperor's entrance was met with immediate tension, his icy glare cutting through the air like a blade as he witnessed Laura's disrespect toward Rashta. The ladies-in-waiting scrambled to lift their skirts and bow, but the Emperor's presence only deepened the severity of the situation. The Empress, having seen Sovieshu on a few occasions prior, chose to observe quietly rather than greet him again. Sovieshu's attention shifted from Laura to Rashta, whose wide, frightened eyes were glistening with tears. Goodness, he sighed, a hint of concern lacing his voice. Don't cry. But despite his attempt to console her, Rashta's tears only flowed more freely, and the Emperor, typically known for his cold demeanor, showed a rare glimpse of worry. You're a handful, he muttered, and in a surprising act of tenderness, he pulled out a gold-embroidered handkerchief to offer her. When she still didn't stop crying, he took it upon himself to wipe her face. The sight tugged at the Empress's heart, sending a painful throb through her chest. She reminded herself of Countess Eliza's words about the dangers of jealousy and love, but the ache persisted. I'm tired, the Empress announced, turning away to signal her ladies-in-waiting to follow her. She would not be able to change the fact that Sovieshu was inclined to keep a concubine, but she could choose to look away from the reality of it all. As she took a few steps, however, she heard his voice call out behind her. Wait. Stop. The command was directed at her, and she turned slowly to see Sovieshu glaring at Laura, pointing an accusatory finger. Leave that lady-in-waiting behind, Empress. What for? She asked, a sense of dread pooling in her stomach. Leave her. She is my lady-in-waiting. You need to tell me first. Laura's complexion drained of color as the implications of the Emperor's demand began to sink in. The Empress could feel an ominous wind blowing through her thoughts. Surely he wouldn't punish Laura for her outburst, would he? She's a lady-in-waiting of the Empress, but she is also my subject. How dare she speak like that? Sovieshu's voice was stern, his expression unyielding. I will scold her, the Empress insisted, her heart racing. You think a scolding will fix someone who calls another person filthy? Surely not. His frustration grew as he barked an order to a nearby guard, pointing toward Laura. Lock her up for 3 days and give her only water and hard bread. A gasp escaped Laura's lips, and the other ladies-in-waiting cried out in distress. That is too far, Your Majesty, the Empress protested, stepping forward to defend her. Sovieshu's glare shifted to her, icy and unrelenting. She called a woman in a wheelchair who can't even properly walk filthy. Don't you think that is too far? The Empress felt her heart race at his words, her mind scrambling for a defense. My ladies-in-waiting only stopped her because she pulled my dress, she argued, trying to reason with him. Sovieshu's face darkened further. You were walking away from her. Your Majesty. What is wrong with holding a dress? Is the Empress's dress more noble than a human hand? Then I will have your servant pull at the hem of your cloak. Even if your cloak is not as noble as a human hand, is that still acceptable? Sovieshu raised his eyebrows, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Your words are meaningless. Do you really think it is the same situation? Is it different? It is. Then what is the difference? Rashta is not a servant. The Empress could feel her frustration boiling beneath the surface. She wanted to challenge him, to question how he would respond if a concubine were to grab at his clothing. But before she could speak, Sovieshu's voice cut through her thoughts again. Lock up the Empress's lady-in-waiting for 5 days. Panic gripped the Empress. The more she opposed him, the more severe his decisions became. She turned to see Rashta watching the exchange, her wide eyes filled with a mixture of awe and fear, as if she viewed Sovieshu as a savior in that moment. The Empress's heart raced, words of protest on the tip of her tongue, but she knew the limits of her power. Even the Empress could not overturn the Emperor's orders. A trial could be called, but by the time it occurred, Laura would already be released. I accept the punishment, Your Majesty, Laura said suddenly, stepping forward. The Empress felt a rush of shame and anger color her cheeks. Go, the Emperor commanded, his voice firm. At last, after 5 days, Laura's confinement ended. Navier personally went to the tower to retrieve her. The moment they returned, she instructed her ladies-in-waiting to bathe Laura in her own bathroom and prepare a warm meal. She even ordered Laura's favorite cake, a small attempt to ease her suffering. Just as she was seeing to these matters, a secretary arrived, bowing deeply. His Majesty the Emperor requests an audience with Your Majesty. Navier blinked in surprise. Me? Yes, Your Majesty. She turned to Countess Eliza. When the cake is ready, have Laura eat here. Then let her know she may rest for a few days before resuming her duties. Yes, Your Majesty. With a nod, Navier followed the secretary. As they moved eastward, she noted the subtle shift in the palace's atmosphere. Though the walls remained the same, the ambience changed. The different architectural style of Sovieshu's residence made it feel like a world apart. A faint unease settled over her as they neared his chambers. Would Rashta be there? But when she entered, the Emperor sat alone at a small round table. You called for me, she said evenly. Sovieshu's eyes lingered on her, filled with unspoken words. She waited, but when he did not speak, she prompted him. What can I do for you? He hesitated, pressing his lips together before finally speaking. Your lady-in-waiting, the one who was imprisoned. Laura, Navier supplied. The daughter of Marquis Tarital. I heard you retrieved her from the tower yourself. She is my lady-in-waiting, Navier replied, her tone measured. She suffered for 5 days. Sovieshu's expression darkened. Did you have to? Are you asking me whether I had to care for someone who was punished? There was a touch of mockery in her voice. You know what I mean, he said, his frustration growing. You brought her back personally, even though you knew it would offend me. Did you not? Navier studied him for a moment before answering. I suspected you might be displeased. Yet you still chose to care for her? His irritation sharpened. If you had any consideration for me, you would have sent her away. What is the Emperor if the Empress shows kindness to those he punishes? It would not be right to cast someone aside after they have already been punished, Navier said, her voice unwavering. Besides, what she did was not out of line. Calling someone filthy? She was stopping someone from grabbing my dress, Navier countered. A scolding would have sufficed. The more she defended Laura, the harder Sovieshu's expression became. So, you will keep her? It is my right to choose my own ladies-in-waiting, she replied firmly. Although Laura might wish to leave the palace after this ordeal, Navier would not let her go. Not yet. The punishment had already made Laura a pariah among the nobility. If Navier dismissed her now, she would have no protection. As Empress, she would use her name to shield her lady-in-waiting. Sovieshu sighed, rubbing his temples. I am tired of arguing with you. Can you not simply obey me for once? The Empress does not exist to bend to the Emperor's will. He scoffed. If you continue like this, you won't even be able to compare. Compare? Her heart clenched, but she refused to ask what he meant. Sovieshu stared at her for a long moment, then gave a bitter smile. I see that you're tired. Retire for the night. He waved a hand dismissively. Go back and tend to your misbehaving filly. After Navier left, Sovieshu let out a weary sigh and rang a small bell on the table. The door opened, but instead of a servant, Rashta stepped in. Since when do you work? He asked, puzzled. Rashta gave a sheepish smile. I feel like a burden when I do nothing. So, you've decided to work now? Spreading her arms dramatically, she beamed. Yes. Sovieshu chuckled, shaking his head. You can't even move around by yourself yet. To serve the Emperor was a coveted position, one even noblewomen fought over. Yet Rashta, oblivious to the status it held, saw it only as a way to avoid feeling useless. Sovieshu found her innocence, her simplicity, oddly fascinating. What an unusual person, he mused, chuckling. Navier had been raised with grace and composure, trained in imperial etiquette, and molded to perfection. Rashta, in contrast, was clumsy and naive, but somehow she captivated him. Come, have a snack, he offered, ringing the bell again. A servant entered swiftly. Pumpkin pie, Sovieshu ordered. Very sweet, and bring wine, a light one. The servant bowed and departed. As soon as the door closed, Rashta clapped her hands in delight. Pumpkin pie! Sovieshu arched a brow. You like food that much? Not just any food, she said, her voice softening. There are many people who have never even had a bite of pumpkin pie in their entire lives. Her innocent words held a weight Sovieshu hadn't expected. He studied her carefully. The Empress doesn't even react to jewelry, no matter how expensive, he remarked, but you find joy in the simplest things. Doesn't Her Majesty like jewelry? Rashta asked curiously. She does, Sovieshu admitted, but she doesn't show emotion easily. Even when she's pleased, she barely reacts. Rashta frowned. That's because she grew up surrounded by wealth. Of course, jewelry wouldn't surprise her. Sovieshu tilted his head, intrigued. My prey is sharper than I thought. Rashta puffed her cheeks. Ch-ch, you always call me prey. Because you're the prey I caught in my trap. She giggled at his teasing, but soon sobered, twisting her fingers anxiously. Your Majesty, she began hesitantly. You said you would make me your concubine? Yes, he confirmed. The Empress doesn't know yet, does she? Sovieshu nodded, offering her a reassuring smile. There's no rush. Let's take our time. The palace brimmed with hushed murmurs, an undercurrent of gossip rippling through its halls. The Emperor is taking a concubine. It was a morning like any other, neither cloudy nor bright, neither warm nor cold, a perfectly ordinary day disrupted by a single piece of shocking news. So, while the Empress prepares for the new year, the Emperor welcomes a concubine? That's too much. He should have at least waited until after New Year's. The ladies-in-waiting whispered among themselves, their tones dark with disapproval. Navier sat before her mirror, silent as she listened to their complaints. She had expected this moment to come. Sovieshu's fondness for Rashta had been evident from the start. But still, she had not anticipated it happening so soon. A quiet sigh escaped her lips. The thought of facing nobles during the New Year's celebrations, of enduring their pitiful glances and the veiled gossip behind her back, filled her with an unfamiliar weariness. When is the ceremony? She finally asked, her voice even. The ladies-in-waiting hesitated before Countess Eliza answered. Rumor has it he wants it to happen as soon as possible, likely before the New Year. Meanwhile, in a sunlit chamber of the Eastern Palace, Rashta sat across from Baron Lant, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. The Emperor will sign the contract first, the Baron explained, laying a sheet of parchment before her. Then you will sign below his name on the thin black line. Rashta's eyes widened. A small, panicked sound escaped her lips, an unfamiliar, unpolished noise that made the Baron pause. I understand, but… Rashta hesitated, color rising in her cheeks. Rashta has no signature. Baron Lant blinked. Then realization dawned. You don't know how to write, he stated, more than asked. Rashta's face turned redder, her hands clenching in her skirts. The Baron had known she was a commoner, but he had assumed she possessed some basic education. He had not truly believed the whispers that she had once been a slave. But now… He masked his thoughts with a practiced smile and placed a blank sheet of paper in front of her. You can create one, he said gently. If you cannot spell your name, I'll write several versions of Rashta for you to choose from. You can memorize one. Rashta bit her lip, nodding eagerly. She listened intently as he guided her, copying each letter with deep concentration. Though slow at first, she learned quickly, her determination evident in every carefully drawn stroke. Baron Lant watched her in silent astonishment. Am I doing well? She asked, peeking up at him shyly. You're doing excellently, he assured her. She beamed, the glow of his praise lighting up her face. Encouraged by her enthusiasm, Baron Lant moved on. At the signing ceremony, all the nobles will be present, he explained. You may invite as many friends as you wish. Rashta gasped in delight. Wow! The Chancellor will present the contract to you. Once you sign, he will keep it safe. At that, Rashta gave a little excited squeal, her feet kicking beneath the table. Baron Lant, watching her childlike joy, hesitated for a moment before adding another piece of information. This is not required, he said carefully, but often the Empress sends a gift to the Emperor's concubine when she signs the contract. Rashta's delighted expression faltered. A gift? The Empress is the mistress of the palace, he explained. For her to acknowledge the concubine with a gift is a significant gesture. It signifies that the concubine is not only recognized by the Emperor, but also by the Empress. Among multiple concubines, those who receive a gift from the Empress are regarded as the most important. Rashta swallowed, her fingers tightening around the quill. So, Rashta will receive a gift from the Empress? She asked hesitantly. For the first time since the lesson began, uncertainty clouded her bright, eager eyes. The Empress sat in quiet contemplation as the murmurs of her ladies-in-waiting filled the chamber. I'm not sending one. A palpable wave of relief passed through the gathered women. Thank God. I was worried Her Majesty might feel obligated to send her a gift. Navier had expected such a reaction. After Sovieshu's secretary departed, she had taken the time to research past precedents. There was no strict obligation for an empress to bestow a gift upon the emperor's concubine, even if a banquet were held. In cases where there were multiple concubines, withholding gifts was a strategic move, preventing any one woman from amassing too much influence through the empress's goodwill. But this was not a situation of political maneuvering. It was simply one where she had no desire to give a gift at all. His Majesty sent word that I needn't worry about it, Navier remarked, her voice composed. Why, then, should I say, please take care of my husband? The ladies-in-waiting exchanged satisfied glances. Don't worry, Your Majesty, one of them reassured her. Even if there were a reason, I doubt you'd have sent one anyway. Navier's lips quirked slightly. Laura would have been pleased to hear that. Another lady-in-waiting sighed. I plan to visit her later. I'll be sure to tell her, Your Majesty. There's a rumor that the Prince of the Western Kingdom will attend the New Year's celebration. Is it true? A hush fell over the room as all eyes turned to her, brimming with anticipation. Navier nodded. A chorus of delighted squeals erupted, the ladies fanning themselves in excitement. Navier barely kept herself from laughing. Their enthusiasm was understandable. The Prince of the Western Kingdom was not just royalty. He was a figure of fascination. The younger brother of the reigning king, he was renowned across the continent. He's so handsome, isn't he? They say just making eye contact with him is enough to be bewitched. But isn't he quite stubborn? Even his brother the king has given up on marrying him off. Are the rumors true that he's a seedless watermelon? I don't know about that, but it is strange. Neither he nor the king have produced an heir. Navier listened to their gossip with quiet amusement, allowing herself a rare indulgence in their light-hearted chatter. It was a welcome distraction from thoughts of Sovieshu and his concubine. Rashta? Countess Eliza's voice carried clear distaste. The guards confirmed it. The concubine had come to see the Empress. A heavy silence fell over the room. The ladies-in-waiting exchanged glances, their expressions mirroring the Empress's own reluctance. But after a pause, she nodded. "Let her in." Eliza gasped. "Your Majesty." "It's fine." The doors opened and Rashta entered with a bright, beaming smile, as if oblivious to the tension in the room. "This is our second time meeting, Your Majesty," she said cheerfully. "I am Rashta." The Empress's expression remained unreadable. "Unlike before, you are now officially the Emperor's concubine. Congratulations." "Thank you," Rashta beamed, unfazed by the mechanical tone of the words. The Empress wasted no time. "Why have you come?" "Why?" Rashta tilted her head. "Because we're family now, Your Majesty, like sisters." Countess Eliza choked on her coffee. The other ladies-in-waiting stiffened, eyes widening in disbelief. "Sisters?" the Empress echoed, her grip tightening on her cup. "Yes, because we have the same husband." For a moment, the Empress almost laughed. Almost. Did Rashta truly believe that being a concubine made them equals? That they could be sisters simply because they shared Sovieshu? "May I call you sister?" Rashta asked eagerly, hands clasped together like a child asking for a favor. The air in the room turned cold. "No." Rashta blinked, her smile faltering. "Is it because you don't like Rashta?" "It is not about liking or disliking you," the Empress said evenly. "You may be the Emperor's concubine, but you are not my sister." Tears welled in Rashta's eyes. To any outsider, it might have seemed as if she were the victim in this exchange, but the Empress knew better. "Leave." Rashta hesitated, lips quivering, but the command was clear. With a final wounded glance, she turned and exited the room. Rashta sat in her chambers, tracing patterns on her dress, troubled by the Empress's words. "She said I'm a concubine, but not her sister. Does she hate me, Baron Lant?" Baron Lant, caught off guard, frowned. "You visited the Empress?" "She sent me a gift, so I went to thank her." He groaned. "Miss Rashta, your position opposes hers." "But we serve the same husband." Baron Lant sighed. Did she truly not understand? Realizing she lacked a lady-in-waiting, he went straight to the Emperor. "Your Majesty, Rashta is ignorant of aristocratic society. She needs guidance." Sovieshu nodded. "Find someone to assist her." Meanwhile, the Empress strolled through the gardens when she spotted a handsome bird with a note tied to its leg. "I'm a foreign guest who will arrive on New Year's Day. Wrote this after drinking." Amused, she wrote back. "A drunken bird flies back. If it finds the right way, it will be better off than its master." After releasing it, she returned to find a secretary waiting. "The Emperor has summoned you, Your Majesty." Sighing, she changed into formal attire and followed him. Sovieshu wasted no time. "I need to appoint a lady-in-waiting for Rashta, but no noblewomen have volunteered. As the palace's mistress, your approval is necessary. Can you find one for her?" The Empress set down her teacup, barely restraining a bitter laugh. After everything, he now expected her to help his concubine? The Empress sat in her chambers, surrounded by her furious ladies-in-waiting. "Nonsense. Why should the Empress find a lady-in-waiting for the concubine?" one of them cried. Countess Eliza rubbed her neck anxiously while Viscountess Verdi fanned her. "Thank goodness Laura isn't here. She'd surely say something reckless." The Empress remained silent, her gaze distant. "What will you do, Your Majesty?" one finally asked. "I wish I could refuse, but it was a direct order." Her ladies exchanged worried glances. The best candidates were women from fallen or lower noble families, yet few had the means to reach the palace. After a pause, the Empress turned to Countess Eliza. "Send invitations to the young ladies of the capital." "Yes, Your Majesty." In the palace gardens, the tea party was in full swing, with noblewomen of all ranks in attendance. The Empress waited for the right moment before speaking. His Majesty has asked me to appoint a lady-in-waiting for Miss Rashta. As it must be done before New Year's, I cannot search far. Do any of you know someone suitable? She had chosen her words carefully, avoiding directly asking who would serve Rashta. The noblewomen, despite their varying ranks, still carried their pride. Silence followed. Then Lady Alishute hesitantly stepped forward. Your Majesty, this has been the talk for days, but please do not tell the Emperor what I say. You may speak. The young noblewoman took a deep breath. There is a rumor that Miss Rashta is a runaway slave. If she were merely a commoner, some might be willing to serve her. But if the rumor is true... Murmurs rippled through the gathering. One would lose their dignity serving a runaway slave. To accept would be an insult, not an honor. The noblewomen turned questioning gazes toward the Empress. Your Majesty, is it true? She calmly repeated Sovieshu's official explanation. Rashta was a commoner injured by accident. By evening, the guests had departed. Did the Empress say something strange when she summoned them? His tone was playful, but his gaze was sharp. She held his stare. Of course not. I don't know much about your concubine, but I wouldn't say anything strange. His expression darkened. People speak even when they know nothing. That's true, she agreed. And some doubt their partner without seeing or hearing for themselves. A flicker of guilt passed through him. They stared at each other in silence before he finally relented. If you say so, then I won't doubt you. I don't doubt you either, she replied coolly. Sovieshu smiled, though it did little to ease the tension. I was only asking. Don't be offended. The Empress returned his smile, though hers was empty. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the imperial palace in a soft amber glow. Inside the grand walls, Empress Navier walked with a composed grace, though her heart felt heavy. The weight of Sovieshu's accusations still lingered in her mind, but she had long since decided. She would not let him or his concubine shake her. In a secluded corner of the palace gardens, she had found an unexpected comfort. A large, beautiful bird that seemed unnaturally intelligent. Its presence brought her solace, and its mysterious notes intrigued her. She had named it Queen, unaware that the bird was no ordinary creature. Far from the palace, atop a lonely mountain ridge, the bird landed upon a rocky outcrop. In a swirl of magic, feathers gave way to flesh, and in its place stood a striking young man, his golden hair tousled by the wind. He stretched his arms, his fine tunic settling over his well-built frame. She named me Queen, he muttered, shaking his head with mild amusement. From the shadows, another figure stepped forward, a man with deep blue hair and a sharp, scrutinizing gaze. He wore a flowing red cape, which he swung over his shoulder as he approached. You were supposed to be scouting, not exchanging letters with the Empress, the blue-haired man remarked, his voice laced with exasperation. The golden-haired man, Prince Heinrich of the Western Kingdom, smirked, leaning back against the rock. And I was. What better way to gather information than to interact with the Empress herself? The blue-haired man sighed. I hope you remember why you are here. You are next in line for the throne. Your actions should reflect that. Heinrich tilted his head, a mischievous glint in his eye. You think I don't know that? His thoughts drifted back to the palace, to the regal yet lonely figure who had whispered her secrets to a mere bird. Navier. There was a quiet strength in her, a resilience that intrigued him. I am scouting indeed, he continued, and I think I found something, or rather someone, of great interest. His companion frowned but said nothing. He knew Heinrich well enough to recognize that tone. The prince was not just playing a game. He was intrigued by the Empress in a way that could alter the course of both their fates. And as the night deepened, far below in the palace, Navier sat by her window, unaware that the bird she had named Queen was, in fact, a prince who would change her life forever. The Empress sat frozen, her fingers tightening around the delicate note. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the playful words again. I arrived at the imperial palace. Do you know who I am? Her gaze drifted from the paper to the golden bird perched on her windowsill. Queen tilted his head, blinking at her with knowing violet eyes. Eyes that now seemed far too familiar. Navier's heart pounded in her chest. It couldn't be. Could it? She glanced at her ladies-in-waiting, who were still busy fussing over the bird, offering bits of fruit and cooing at his beauty. They had no idea. None of them suspected that the clever creature they adored was more than what he appeared to be. Swallowing hard, Navier smoothed the parchment on her desk and reached for her pen. She hesitated only a moment before writing a reply. "You wouldn't be so bold as to trick an empress, would you?" She carefully tied the note to Queen's leg and stroked his head, whispering, "Take it back quickly." The bird gave a low chirp as if amused and launched into the sky. Navier sat back, her thoughts spinning. If her suspicion was correct, if Queen was indeed him, then she had unknowingly been exchanging letters with Prince Heinley of the Western Kingdom all this time. And he had been watching her far longer than she ever realized. The day before the New Year's celebrations, Empress Navier was finishing the last of her duties when a knight entered her office. "Your Majesty, Prince Heinley wishes to see you." Surprised, Navier stepped outside, finding the prince studying a mural with his back to her. At the sound of her approach, he turned, offering a smooth bow. "I hope I'm not intruding?" he asked, a glint of mischief in his violet eyes. "Not at all," she replied. "What can I do for you?" "I heard you would be finished around this time," he said lightly. "Would you mind showing me the palace? It's so vast. I fear I'll get lost." Navier instinctively thought to assign a lady-in-waiting, but before she could speak, Heinley cut in with a soft, deliberate request. "You." His gaze met hers, unwavering. "I wish for the Queen to guide me." Navier hesitated, searching his expression, but found only playful insistence. Finally, she nodded. "Very well." With that, she turned, leading the prince into the palace, unaware of how much this simple walk would change both their fates. The Queen walked at a steady pace, her gown trailing over the polished marble floors, as Prince Heinley strolled beside her. His golden hair shimmered under the dim lanterns, his violet eyes glinting with a playful arrogance that only he could carry so effortlessly. She had expected many things from this walk. Formality, small talk, perhaps even careful diplomacy. But not this. Not his teasing words, nor the way he so shamelessly asked if she found him handsome. It was absurd, and yet a small part of her found it oddly amusing. Prince Heinley studied her expression as they passed through an archway leading into the western gardens. She was graceful but guarded, every step measured, every word chosen with precision. It was no wonder the emperor had taken her for granted. She was too composed, too perfect, like a carefully carved statue. But statues did not write witty letters. Nor did they take in a soaking wet bird and cradle it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. The memory of that night flickered in his mind. She had stroked Queen's feathers so gently, spoken in a whisper so soft that he almost wished to remain in that form forever, just to stay close to her. And yet here she was now, cool and distant, barely sparing him a glance. "Your Majesty," he said, slowing his pace. She turned her head slightly, acknowledging him but not stopping. "You're an interesting woman," he mused. Her brow arched. "Am I?" "Yes, you reject flattery so naturally, I have to wonder. Do you ever believe it?" She exhaled softly, a quiet amusement in her gaze. "Flattery is often empty, Prince Heinley." He grinned, and yet sometimes it is sincere. She turned her head away, saying nothing, but he caught the faintest tug at the corner of her lips. A near smile. It was fleeting, barely there, but he noticed. His chest tightened unexpectedly. Perhaps he had started this game to entertain himself, to chase away the boredom of courtly life, to indulge in the thrill of a secret correspondence. But standing beside her now, walking under the moonlit sky, he realized something. This was no game anymore. She fascinated him. Not as Queen's owner, not as the Empress of the Eastern Empire, but as herself. A woman who held her head high despite the weight of a crown, who endured whispers and betrayals without faltering, who cared for a simple bird as if it were more than just a messenger. Prince Heinle glanced at her once more, and a quiet determination settled in his chest. He would make her smile again. Not the polite, forced ones she offered to appease those around her, but a real one. A genuine, unguarded smile. And if he had to spend the rest of the New Year's celebrations chasing that moment, then so be it.